Hey everyone, it's Michelle from Oregon. I'm going to make a quick tutorial on how I make these Stampscapes luminaries. Here are two I have left. I sold the other two that I made previously. And at the end I'll show you how I assemble them and how they look when they're done. I use Vellum because alcohol inks work best on it, and Yupo paper. And I do make luminaries with Yupo paper, but you can't rubber stamp or heat emboss on it. You supposedly can if you're very slow and patient, but I'm neither of those things. So I just use Vellum because it works really nicely. Plus I can see my design through it. So I tear a sheet in half. If you've watched some of my other tutorials, a lot of this is going to be redundant, but I'm going to do start to finish. So I tear them in half, that way I get two luminaries out of one sheet of paper, but sometimes I make them larger or smaller according to what I want to do. Then I stamped my design on some scrap paper, just using my stamp positioner too. If you don't know what that is, I'll show you in the video. So that's one design. This was the first one I did, I think. And then I wanted it to have a deer in it, so I made a second one that had the deer in it. So you stamp your design how you want it to be on a scrap piece of paper first. And you do this because you can't heat emboss it and then put the alcohol ink on. It will ruin the embossing, unfortunately, because that would be much easier. So I lay it on here. I use some temporary or removable double stick tape to hold it in place while I color so it stays in the same spot. Sorry for reaching through over the camera. And I use Copic markers for the trees and things. You could use a paintbrush with alcohol inks. Oh, I better go over supplies. So besides the rubber stamps, these are Stampscapes. And I'll provide a link to where you can get these wonderful images. And if you don't know how to do rubber stamping, I'll cover that really quickly as well. Also you need some isopropyl alcohol. I use 99%. I have some in a spray bottle that I use also, and it's in just a little dish for when I'm painting with it. Then of course you need the alcohol inks themselves. Paintbrushes I have that I use just for the alcohol inks. I think that's all. I usually do the sky first, and I move this one up because I wanted to have a little more room for the sky. I think on the original one of this, I made the vellum a little bit bigger. I can't quite remember. So I use blending solution or the isopropyl alcohol, like I said, but you can't put a whole lot on here because vellum gets all wrinkly. The more fluid you add to it. So I put some isopropyl on or blending solution. It just depends on the effect I want. They both do different things. And then I put some ink on. I'm just going to go really kind of faster than usual, and I'm going to pause for 1 second. So I got a bunch of ink on there, and you can see it's moving by itself because I already had that ISO on there. And then you can use your brush to move it around. I quite often use, I forgot to put this in the supplies, I use my handheld puffer, and my tape isn't sticking, but that's okay. So I can add some more ISO. Anyway, so I just get the sky how I want it. I just want a little bit more blue. Sometimes I add a moon or a sun or not. I'm going to use this a little bit more. The more blending solution you have on, or the ISO, the easier it is to move it around, but you also don't want to put too much on because it will get really wrinkly and it's hard to kind of undo. Now I want to go into the trees a little bit, so I have a little bit of color down in here in the spaces between the trees. Whoops. Okay, so I'm going to work on the sky for a minute. Now the vellum was starting to get wrinkled from all the ISO I was using, so I kind of stopped on that, and I used my air puffer to dry it fast too. So I'm not totally happy with the sky, so I might add some more to that, but I'm going to stop and work on the grass for a minute. No, actually I'm not. I usually work from top to bottom so I don't smear anything on the bottom as I go. I'm going to work on these trees with the Copic marker. I don't have very many colors of these because they're really expensive and someone gifted me some. So I've got two colors, or two shades of green. They have a brush tip on one end and a chisel tip on the other. I have been using the brush tip and I like it for doing these trees. Sometimes I remove the ink that's on here first. If it's a lot like that orange kind of sunset one I did, it was kind of a lot to blend these colors into, and then I'll come back in and do it a little more exact, but just so that for the sake of the video. Okay, I changed it up. I decided to do the other one, and so I went with a different sky and some blending solution. This one. So as you can see, once it starts drying, it kind of leaves these hard lines, and so if you mess with one area, you kind of have to go across and do all of it, or it leaves those hard lines. So that's tricky, and then sometimes I just spray it with the ISO and start over and let it flow how it wants to. So I'm just going to keep messing with the sky a little bit. And if I wanted to add a moon or anything, I would do that now. You can just start making a circle with the ISO and it starts removing the ink. Sometimes I use a Q-tip. So I started to do a moon there, but I got a little carried away and rubbed a little too much, so I'm just going to color it back in. It's kind of like watercolor paper. If you rub it too much, it starts to wear away. Okay, now that I've messed with the sky more than I really wanted to, we'll start the trees again with the Copic markers. I thought I was recording as I was coloring the tree then. I was saying you don't have to be super accurate in terms of coloring them. You kind of do in terms of your placement of it, because you can put your stamp over it. So I'm just adding the color so that it does show through in the spaces where the trees are. I like the Copics because you can have a little more accuracy. It's easy to color these rocks in. And then if you just do one layer, it doesn't really give you the alcohol ink effect. So it also pushes away the color that I've already got on here. I accidentally got some green in here and the purple from the sky, but that's okay. It just pushes it away, and I'm just going to color these in. I'm going to do a few layers so that you get the characteristics of the alcohol inks. There's also going to be some green grass in here too that's going to take away some of the brown I've got going on here. I use the darker green I have for the tree, so I'm going to use the lighter green for the grass. That's on this stamp. It's very hard to see on here, but I just make these little dabs where the green grass is on here, and it just goes right over the brown, so that's nice. And again, they can be just however. Your stamp covers up a lot of it, but the green does show through. So you can see how the alcohol ink reacts if you just put it straight on without blending it. I'm trying to darken the spots where it's dark on the stamp, the image, where the reflection is. So I wanted to show you how you have to work with that. You just have to smooth it back out. So I'm going to do the whole little stream area over again. This with a little ISO on my brush. I'm going to have it kind of fade out to the edges, get lighter. That's better. So now if I want to darken those spots up, and I'm using alcohol inks instead of Copic markers because I don't have any that are this color. So now I'm going to go ahead and do that again, but this time, oops, I went there where I didn't want to. That's okay, I can fix that later. Now I'm adding another layer of another blue, aquamarine. First color was Pool. It's a little lighter blue. Just to get the characteristics and layers from the alcohol inks. You'll notice they pool up. They like to run up and away from where you're working. They just really have a mind of their own. The more isopropyl alcohol you have on your brush, and the less color, you know, you can get that faded look. The more ink you have on here, on your brush, and less ISO, the darker it is. So I can kind of come in like I did before, but I'm still going to have to blend that. So those of you that don't do alcohol inks, you can kind of see how they just have a mind of their own. It's a challenge. Now on the water, I like to add some sparkles, and my vellum's curling up. There. So I take a little bit of ISO on my brush and get most of it off. And then I take any kind of surface that's hard and I can splatter. Let's see if I can do it on here. Splatter a little more controlled where I want it. I don't want to splatter anywhere else but in the water. Get a little bit on my brush. Sometimes I get too much. I practice over here and see off the vellum. There we go. That will make little white sparklies in the water. There we go. If I get too much, I can just do it again, but again, you have to do the whole area. Okay, so I'm going to fuss with this a little bit more and finish coloring. I accidentally got alcohol splatters where I didn't want it, but I can just take these Copics and go back in and fix that. I might leave some of them there. It actually looks kind of cool. This is how I color the trees. Real technical. Oops. And then the grass, I'm just using Mojito green and a lot of ISO and layering that on as well. I have used the Copic markers in the past to highlight the grass in here. I don't like this line here, so I'm going to try to soften that a bit. Now, we have this colored. We take our stamp positioner, which is just this T-square, basically, a piece of acrylic, and another square piece of acrylic. I use it a lot to fix images that I misstamped because it's too hard to place the stamp in the same spot twice. So you get the plastic in the corner all the way of the stamp positioner. Sorry, it's hard to see, but I also want to be zoomed in. Then you ink up your stamp. I just use a dye-based ink for this part because I want it to clean off my stamp really well. Get it in the corner of the stamp positioner and then place it on the plastic. With these big ones, I have to stand up. Press pretty good so you get a good image. Okay, so then I have the plastic piece that has my image on it. Then I clean my stamp really well. Normally, you would use a black pigment ink on here and use black embossing powder, but I find that it smears easily and it's real messy, so I use a Versamark ink pad. Okay, once I have the stamped image on my stamp positioner, I line it up on my piece of vellum with my coloring. T-square in place, And I'll come back and do that in 1 second. Okay, so I've got it lined up with the image. Then I take the piece of plastic away and keep the T-square there and ink up my stamp, and I'll be right back. Once I do that, or before I do that, sometimes I use the static puff to try to get off any oils from my fingers so the powder doesn't stick anywhere. I use Versamark instead of the black pigment ink, like I said. Ink up your stamp with it. And sorry, Kevin, I wipe off these dots on here because I want my blue water to show through. And I found that that makes a difference. Okay. And we stamp it. Making sure the corner of the stamp is in the corner of the T-square. And I pressed really hard. I have to stand up and do these big ones and then lift up and hope that I got it. The only bad thing about using the Versamark is I can't see until I put the powder on. I use fine embossing powder. I guess all of it's fine these days. And I pour it on like you do glue and glitter. Cover it. Shake off the excess. I have some powder where I don't want it, so I'm going to use a little paintbrush and wipe that off, and I'll be right back. And that's how you get the shiny erased image, by embossing on there. Now I'll do the two trees, or do the trees stamped twice on either side, lined up with those trees, and then the grass on the bottom. I'm going to hurry for the sake of this video. The length is already long, and I want to light this up and see what it's going to look like. Here's the completed luminary. And all I do to temporarily assemble it so I can take photos, I just use removable double-sided tape and make it into a cylinder like that. And now it's our round luminary. And now we'll take video of it lit with the tea light. I use these little LED tea lights. And here's what our finished luminary looks like. I bought this cool little turntable thing so I can make it go around.